My 176 on stage couldn't persuade him to do things in Canada. But they planned and they promised that they're watching me live. Sure.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It is 7 o'clock. The magic hour has come. This is starting to look like the church I used to be the organist at. The organ was up here, and then there were a whole lot of empty seats, and then way back there was the congregation somewhere. Well, hello and welcome. Let's open with prayer. The Lord be with you. May the words of my mouth, O Lord, and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight and guided by your Spirit. In the strong name of Christ. Amen. All right. We're chugging right along in this book, and we are ready for chapter 10. How many of you know Keeping Up Appearances from TV? How many of you have seen that show? Well, yes, it is. It is Hyacinth Bouquet rather than Bucket. Well, then, when you read chapter 10, that should have rung a bell with you. I mean, it did for me by the time I got through with the first paragraph, because they're dead ringers for each other. And so before I start, let me simply ask, frankly, last week got really, really heavy. I warned you about that, and we experienced that together. And I guess before we barge on, let me just ask if, as things might have percolated over the week, is there any questions you have or insights that you had based on all those C.S. Lewis themes that we talked about last week? Okay. Is there anything about chapter 10 with the nagging wife ghost? Before I get started, anything you want to ask about?
I see myself in there.
You do or don't?
I try not to see.
Try not to. Well, that's good to hear, Mary. Yeah. Try not to see yourself. That would be good about all of these. Yeah. Connie, was that a hand? No? No? Okay. Yeah, John.
Yeah, it was. Robert and Hilda made it to heaven, but she did not.
Well, so far as we know.
So apparently, he remarried and married Hilda because she's talking to Hilda in heaven.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Who is Hilda?
Hilda was, I think, his second wife, is the way I interpreted it.
The nice one.
The nice one, yeah.
I was just confessing to Mark the difficulty I have with names and dates, and I'm blanking out on who Hilda was myself. Is that?
I thought Hilda was her sister. But she talked about how she treated her mother.
Well, I'm sorry to say I'm a little, I'm dusty on the names, and that's not a good thing.
Hilda says she's talking to about Robert.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, here's what she has to say. You haven't the faintest idea what I went through with dear Robert. The ingratitude. It was I who made a man of him, sacrificed my whole life to him. And what was my reward? Absolute, utter selfishness. I had to positively nag him to take on that extra work, though it was really the beginning of everything for him. I had to keep him going all evening. And then he got the new job. All he said was, well, now for God's sake, can we have some peace? That nearly finished me. So what if you knew a woman like this, and she was talking with you about her frustrations? What might you suggest to her? I don't know about you, but I've known people like this.
I guess you have to ask the husbands if they've known any woman like this. What'd you say?
That's the husband.
Have to ask her husband. We have nothing to help this woman?
It seems like she's dictating what he's to do next rather than asking him, questioning him as to what would be his desire. Or he sounds like he's not terribly motivated, but
Okay.
because he hasn't found what he really loves to do.
Well, he does, he loves to write, but she doesn't want him to do that. You know, because she's still stuck on his desk, on his papers.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah, he had at least a hobby, if not an avocation of writing.
Recognize.
Yeah.
She-
And she
With that.
had other plans for him. So she
She's not acknowledging him as a person.
Oh, that's very good. She is not acknowledging him as a person. She has in her mind what she wants her husband to be. And like Hyacinth Bouquet, what she wants is for him to rise in society just as high as he possibly can, to keep getting ahead, to play the world's game, to fall in line with the spirit of the age, as we were talking about before. What is it that makes a man successful in the business world? She ends up by saying, finally, after a long time, I am so miserable. I must have someone to do things to. And here Lewis helps us get to the bottom line of what really is working with her. What does how does that translate? She must have someone to do things to. What's if we were to get her to say more about this, what else would she say if she was honest about herself? All right.
She likes to be in control.
She's a control freak. That certainly is true.
She likes to be right.
Okay. Likes to be right.
If she didn't have someone else to work on, she'd have to work on herself.
Ah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
But she also states, why should he have everything his own way?
Why should he have everything his own way when, in point of fact, he's had
He's never had it.
virtually nothing his own way? Yeah. That's right. That's right.
But I wonder if ultimately she doesn't want him to stand up and say, okay, that's enough. I'm the man in the house. You know, how would she react then?
How would she? You know, it's funny. I was looking at episodes of Keeping Up Appearances on TV, on YouTube, these little clips of it. And, you know, she's always bossing Richard. She's always bossing Richard around. And there's one time when she wants to get into a telephone booth, and there's a man who gets in right in front of her, and she wants Richard to come and extract this man from the telephone booth. And she keeps it up, and finally Richard does just that. He loses his cool, and he orders Hyacinth Bouquet to get into the car by raising his voice to her. And she just stops cold and looks all flabbergasted and slowly turns around and walks back into the car. It's exactly what you said. Yeah. It's almost like she's saying, will somebody please stop me? I don't know how to stop myself. Now, let me challenge us all to think together a step further. Lewis would tell us that sin has no substance of its own, but it's always a twisting and a distortion of something that is good. What's the good kernel of something inside this woman that has gotten this twisted to turn her into a controlling, nagging pest?
She should be a helpmate,
Does she should be a helpmate? Does she think she...
I think she should be, but that's her role.
That's her role, to be a helpmate? Does she think she's doing that? But she isn't really, because she's trying to recreate him. She's not trying to help him. She's trying to turn him into what she wants him to be. Or at least she likes being in control. Why? Why do controlling people like to be in control?
She's selfish, I think.
She's certainly selfish.
I mean, she took that water and the vase or whatever it was and threw it on his stuff. His only little place he had, it seemed like, was his desk, and she just destroyed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess he just said, I don't know. You know, and so that was something that, I don't know, he had some peace there, right, but she had to take it away. So I just felt she was selfish.
Well, let me ask...
She didn't care that she could afford the house, she just wanted the house.
Okay.
She's trying to elevate her status by elevating his status.
Ah, yeah. And that's part of that whole selfish thing again that's going
But
on.
I think she wants someone to build her up, to help her own self-esteem.
Okay, Mary. She wants somebody to what?
Build her up.
To build her up.
Her self-confidence.
Did she come out of the womb like this? What happened in her life that turned her into a control freak? Now, we don't know the answer to that, but I think that's one of the questions to be asked.
Demeaned somehow.
Say again, Mary?
I think she might have been demeaned somehow, that she had, this is the only way she knows to make herself visible.
In my experience, people who are like this or exhibit any negative issue like this, if you look in the background, there's a reason. There's a reason they are the way they are. Whether it's obnoxious or controlling or angry, there's a reason behind that. And as you and I in our lives come into contact with flesh and blood people who are just like this or like something else, I think one of the things our Lord would want us to ask is, how did this person get that way? And will I be another one who continues to feed in her these twisted and disordered desires, or will I be the one to take her seriously, or him? It's a him, you know, it could be the other way around. Seriously enough to probe, at least in our own minds, how can I be of help? We talked about this a number of weeks ago. How can I be of help to this person? How can I minister the grace of Jesus Christ to this really obnoxious, controlling person? And some of us have gifts of discernment through the Holy Spirit that enable us to do that. And if you're one of those people, that's a gift that perhaps you might want to be developing more. Others of us are going to have a really hard time knowing. But these people make us so upset and so angry that our response is an aggressive response, or at least to say, I'm staying away from that person, and we abdicate our possible role of ministry that we might have with someone like that.
It's interesting because I wonder too, I don't mean to take up the floor here, I wonder too if Richard didn't experience the same thing, you know, being demeaned and not having anyone give him a feeling of self-confidence to where he could stand up to her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they're sort of on the same plane,
Yeah.
but approaching it differently.
Yeah. Speaking again of Richard and Hyacinth, I was thinking the other day, what were they like when they got married? If Hyacinth was like that back when they got married, I don't think they would have ever gotten married in the first place. So there's a story here. And you know, there's always, isn't there? There's a story. Yeah.
I was wondering why, so we don't know Robert really, right? We don't
No.
really know Robert, but he's in heaven,
Yeah.
and she's trying not to get in heaven, really hard. Trying not to get in heaven. So he obviously had no sin or any.
Not anymore.
Right?
Not anymore. That's
He might
right.
have, right. But did he? wasn't he, did he add to her, whatever her condition is, the controlling condition, by not helping her?
Huh? That's a very good point, Bob. It's there's always a two-way street about these things. Nobody's got completely innocent hands in this business of life. He could have done better. We know that simply because he's a human being, and he's a fallen human being like all the rest of us. And he could have done better and helped her more.
You have to have a skill set to do it, though.
I'm sorry?
You have to have the skill set to do it. It's just like you're saying, we turn away from
Yeah,
people that
yeah.
are crabby and negative and all.
Mhm. But if you make, I would think if you are involved in such a relationship, or you're close to somebody who acts this way, and you're aware of it, do you care enough? Do I care enough to think about it, to ask the Lord to give you insights as to what you can do to be an agent of healing in that situation? Or do you just walk away and say, I'm glad that's not my problem?
And yet, an angel did just that very thing. Ooh. The angel couldn't do anything with it. So
That's right.
The next sentence.
That's right, yeah. And that draws us then into what happens at the end of this story. The ghost, which had towered up like a dying candle with that, I'm so miserable, I must have someone to do things to. She gets larger and larger, and then she snaps. And a sour, dry smell lingered in the air for a moment, and then there was no ghost to be seen. Now, did the angel do that to her? And it doesn't say that the angel did it to her. She did it to herself by her constant decisions, her choices that she chose to make that others could have helped her with, and either she turned them off or whatever. She, through her own choices throughout a whole lifetime, what happens as sin becomes more and more the part of a person? They get smaller and smaller because everything that exists, God created good. Now, let's remember something else about all of these people that occurred to me this week. They all have been in hell for a long time. All these people that we run into, these ghosts, are in far worse shape now than they probably would have been in life. Who knows how long they have been in hell, just getting worse and more deeply ingraining all that negativity into their life. So that's part of it too. Our lady here has worked long and hard to get herself into the situation where she just made herself disappear because she kept making choices that negated the person that God made her to be, as Lewis would see it. And I think he's got a good point.
There was something in here where she actually admitted that down there was not a nice place.
Yes. So there's something, I'm repeating this in case people can't hear what's being said who are at home. Say it again, nice and loud.
There's a statement in here somewhere, if I can find it, that she said that down there where she was not a nice place.
Because, do you remember why?
No, I don't.
Because she couldn't do things to people.
That's right. She lost everybody.
Yeah, so she was left to herself. Well, part of what we were talking about here is selfishness. And C.S. Lewis makes this statement in another one of his great books, The Problem of Pain. And this one kind of hit me right between the eyes. At this very moment, you and I are either committing selfishness or about to commit it. Ouch. Lewis is reminding us of our fallen nature, of the depravity that is simply to be a human being on planet Earth, and reminding me, at least, and I suspect you too, that we're nowhere near as good as we think we are. And if we could really see the things that are motivating us in life, we would be aware of the level of selfishness that's behind a lot of the actions that we do. There is, in Reformed theology, frankly, I don't know how it works out in the Anglican theological system, but the idea of total depravity, which is often misunderstood. Lewis argues against total depravity, but he doesn't understand. It's clear in his writing he doesn't understand what it teaches. The idea that human beings are totally depraved, and it does not mean that any human being is as bad as he might be, but it means that no act, no thought of any human being at any time left to himself or herself is not tainted with self-serving and with sin in some degree. It's related to the scripture passage that tells us that all our righteousness is as what? Filthy rags, all right? Think about that. Even my very highest, best motives and actions are a stench in the nostril of God, because I'm too blind, too twisted to see all the selfish motivations that are going on behind it, to one degree or another, when you look at that through the lens of God's perfection and God's utter holiness. So Lewis reminds us once again that as we look at each of these people, and if we could only see it, and I can't, but I know it's there, that there's a little bit of me in all of these ghosts that we're seeing here. And part of the challenge for all of us is perhaps to prayerfully read this and ask the Lord, to what degree is this twistedness in my nature as well? Anything else about this poor lady? And the rest of the poor clan. Then we move on to more love gone sour. And that's really what's going on here. This poor wife, in her own way, has had twisted, distorted love that has gone really sour. And Lewis gives us two more examples as we move on into chapter 11. One of the books, as we think about what Lewis is talking about here in his little vignettes that are related to love, is a book that he wrote called The Four Loves. In English, if you've ever thought about this, we in the English language are stuck with the word love, and we use it in so many ways that we kind of cheapen the word. But in other languages, and certainly in Greek, as Lewis is referring to, he's dividing love into the four words that one has for love in Greek. First of all, if I remember this correctly, there's storge, which, as you see, there is affection. It's kind of like the familial love that we have for family and very close friends. And then there's friendship. Anybody know the Greek word for friendship? Philia, like in the city Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, right? And then there's eros. He goes ahead and uses the Greek word here, eros, sexual love. And then charity. Now, some of you probably know the Greek word here for that too. This is godly love. Agape love, yes. So he writes a whole book where he talks about the nature of these four loves, how they work in human life and how they don't work, and what happens when they're not working well. So some of my quotes will come in regard to that book. So here we have the loving, really the smothering mother. Not unlike the woman we just had to deal with, but this time it's we don't know the age of the son, but some of the dialogue here, I think, is just incredibly powerful. There's just one insight after another in this section. So she says about Michael, who has died apparently fairly young, "If God loved me, why did he take away Michael from me? My love for Michael would never have gone bad, not if we lived together for millions of years." "Oh, you are mistaken," says the bright one. "Human beings can't make one another really happy for long." God had to take Michael away, partly for his sake, and secondly for your sake. Now, what do you make out of that?
She sort of gives herself away, and she says, not if we live for millions of years. It's like, says, she doesn't have the ability to consecrate or detach herself from it.
She doesn't have the ability to what?
To detach herself, to consecrate him to God.
To consecrate him?
Hers, it's possession.
Okay, great. To consecrate him to God and to detach herself from what? You said detach herself.
Well, I think from her controlling.
Yeah. Okay.
Did she not, she didn't recognize that Michael was God's child, right?
Oh, yeah.
And not just her.
You have just summarized this whole part of the chapter.
We can go home now.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Bob Amber. Mother love, she says, is the highest and holiest feeling in human nature. Pam, no natural feelings are high or low, holy or unholy in themselves. They are all holy when God's hand is on the range, as Mr. Ambrose said. They all go bad when they set up on their own and make themselves into false gods. Now, love being such a powerful emotion, such a godly emotion in its pure form, Lewis tells us often that it is the higher things that become most evil when they go bad. He says at one point, it is not out of mice that you make demons, but out of archangels. Okay? So, the higher the thing is in the created order, the better it is. The worse it turns into when it is allowed to fester and go bad. Love and mother love is one of those very high motives in the human soul. So they turn into very powerful gods when they go bad. And we've seen that in these last two cases. All right, when am I going to be allowed to see him, her son? The Spirit responds, there's no question of being allowed. As soon as it is possible for him to see you, he will. You need to be thickened up a bit. How? The monosyllable was hard and a little threatening. I probably didn't say that the way she had probably said. How? Kind of like that. He says, I'm afraid the first step is a hard one. But after that, I should have said that, but after that, you'll go on like a house of fire. You will become solid enough for Michael to perceive you when you learn to want someone else besides Michael. And here is the crux of what Lewis has to say. You will be able to perceive, or you'll become solid enough for Michael to perceive you when you learn to want someone else besides Michael. What's the deal there? Someone else besides Michael.
It's the same, you have to perceive God, you start on, or God first.
Yeah. He doesn't lay his cards out on the table as Lewis often doesn't. He doesn't preach you the whole sermon, but it's going to become clear. And what he's saying in this whole thing, which Bob has so beautifully summarized for us, that it's the love of God and the giving over of all that we are to God that has got to govern all the other loves. And if it doesn't, they turn to one degree or another demonic. All right? And we'll continue to see that as he continues to develop this idea. You will become solid enough for Michael to perceive you. See, the problem here isn't whether she can see Michael. Michael is so advanced in the kingdom of God. He's way up there somewhere that he doesn't even have the ability to see somebody as insubstantial and wispy as this poor mother has allowed herself and chosen to become. So you'll become solid enough for Michael to perceive you when you learn to want something else besides Michael. I don't say more than Michael, not as a beginning. It's only the little germ of a desire for God that we need to start the process. Lewis is being very biblical here. Can you think of anywhere in the Bible where it says something that means the same thing here? It's only the little germ of a desire. Say it again, Mark.
Mustard seed.
The mustard seed faith. Yeah. And there's another one that occurred to me, although that's perfect, Mark. I have no way to improve on that one. But in chapter 9 of the Gospel of Mark, you might recall there's a boy who is brought to Jesus, and the boy has an evil spirit of some sort with him. So Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. And then he catches himself. He doesn't really know whether he fully believes or not. And he's aware that he's got work to do in that area too. I mean, he's not sure what to make out of Jesus yet. Help my unbelief. Seems to me this is one of the most outstanding insights any of the people that Jesus has encounters with. See, this man knows himself in a way most people Jesus encountered does not. He sees immediately the weakness of his faith. And of course, the child is healed, right? So that little bit of mustard seed faith that Mark was talking about is enough to do the job. And Lewis refers to that. It's only a little germ of a desire for God. Can you at least want to want God? God will accept even that. Lewis says at the end of Surprised by Joy, he's been converted, and he says, you have to imagine me alone in my rooms, night after night, seeing that which I most dreaded becoming more and more cornering me. And finally, on such and such a night, I knelt and admitted that God existed. That night, he said, probably the most reluctant convert in all of England, because he did not want to give in that there was God. There was a God. Then he goes on to say, who can highly enough praise the humility of a God who will accept a person even in such circumstances, kicking and screaming and looking in every direction for a way of escape? That's how much faith it takes for God to start the work in us. For me, that is unbelievable comfort. That God loves me enough and is willing to take me to the next level on so little effort, so little of any substance coming from me to help along the way. Thanks be to God. Well, the woman isn't there yet. You are heartless. The past was all I had. It was all you chose to have. And Lewis is not going to let us get away from this. It's your choice. It's your choice. It's your choice. Over and over again. It was all you chose to have. It was the wrong way to deal with the sorrow. The sorrow was real. The sorrow was serious and horrible. But she still chose the wrong way to deal with it. Oh, of course, I'm wrong. Everything I say and do is wrong, according to you. Lewis turns the tables. But of course, said the Spirit, shining with love and mirth. Can you imagine? After what she says, and he says, well, you're right. Of course, what did you expect? That's what we all find when we reach this country. We've all been wrong. That's the great joke. There's no need to go on pretending one was right. After that, what? We begin living. You will become solid enough for Michael to perceive you when you learn to want someone else besides Michael. No one has a right to come between me and my son, not even God. Tell him that to his face. I want my boy, and I mean to have him. He's mine. Do you understand me? Mine, 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 forever and ever. Woo! Lewis observes in this chapter elsewhere that her mother love has reduced her to a monomaniac. He uses that very word. And I thought I knew what that probably meant, but I had to look it up. And it's what you would expect it means. Obsession with one idea. Intent, concentration on only one subject. Once again, you see the diminishing when we make unwise, ungodly decisions over time. Remember, she's been in hell a long time too. But as we continue to disintegrate in our sin, we get so that there's only one idea left. And it's a false idea that has been put in our heads by the evil one. And that starts to become all that's left of us, is that one idea. Now, this is it at its worst. But if I chose to, I could share with you a number of instances in my life where that whole thing was starting to happen. I was getting obsessed about someone or something or some injustice that I felt was being done to me, and I fed it, and I fed it, and I thought about it more, and I became more and more angry and smaller until, thanks be to God, by the grace of God, God hit me over the side of the head and made me aware of what it was that I was doing to myself, and who knows how many others that I was hurting and damaging with my rotten attitude and my unwise decisions. What an insight. Lewis is so good in this chapter. Just one thing after another. Here's what Lewis says in Screwtape Letters in chapter 11. Now remember, in Screwtape Letters, what you have is an older, experienced demon writing letters to his young apprentice about how to successfully tempt a human being. So in a sense, everything you read is backwards, because the advice that you get is how to turn a person away from God. So keep that in mind. So this older demon is writing to the younger apprentice demon. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims of ownership, which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell. And all the time, the joke is that the word mine, in its full possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. They will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not them. We belong to one of two higher powers. And the sooner we get that through our heads, the better for all of us. The idea of human ownership leads us down many bad paths. Whether it's the ownership of our money, ownership of our possessions, ownership of our position, it can take many forms. My brother-in-law was going through really I have to say the word hellacious times in his life and in his family's life. He's a minister and he loved the Lord and he was a wise man. And he said one day, we have to hold all of our gifts in an open hand for God to take or to keep, because they're not ours in the first place. That George MacDonald goes on to say in this same chapter, every natural love will rise again and live forever in this country. Remember, he's up in heaven. He's not on earth down in hell. Every natural love will rise again and live forever in this country. But none will rise again until it has been buried. The way to life in Christian church is, again, that's what baptism signifies, doesn't it? Going under the waters and where you could die. And remember, back in biblical times, they did a lot of immersions. So you could die when you're under the water. So it's an apt symbol that I think we lose a bit when we just sprinkle a body. But baptism is death and rising again to new life. And that's what MacDonald's pointing out. There is but one good, and that is God. Everything else is good when it looks to Him and bad when it turns from Him. If we want our earthly pleasures to be all they can be, if they want the goodness, if we want the goodness that we can experience in life to infiltrate us and be all that God intends for them to be, we must hold them in open hands for God to do as He pleases. And you and I both know sometimes God takes those things out of our hands. And it hurts like crazy. But in the end, we get them back again in far better shape. Now, before we go on to a little bit more about how Lewis talks about love and the loves, anything rattling around in your head at this point? Yes, Father.
Reminds me of the woman's experience of having mother love, which in respect to it, mother love compared to agape is a smaller love. Mm-hmm. She's mistaken it for the greatest love, so she's calling it by the wrong thing, which you could say is idolatry. But what she's done, or what it reminds me of, is when Jesus speaks about the kingdom, it says that it's a very non-egalitarian statement that for those who have little, or those who have much, more will be given to them. And for those who have little, even what they have will be taken from them, which seems very wrong, but in this picture it seems to make sense to me. That she has very little, that she doesn't want anymore, and the little that she has gets littler and littler and littler, as if it's being taken from, even that's being taken from her.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to have your love placed rightly, which is a lot, it gets bigger and more and more and more. Anyway, it reminded me of what Jesus said.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lewis, in his book, The Four Loves, helps us to understand many things, but in this instance, I want to point out to you what he calls gift love and need love. Here's what he says in The Four Loves. Divine love is gift love. The Father gives all he is and has to the Son. The Son gives himself back to the Father and gives himself to the world. And what can be less like everything we believe of God's life than need love? God lacks nothing. But our need love, as Plato saw, is the son of poverty. We're born helpless. As soon as we are fully conscious, we discover loneliness. We need others physically, emotionally, intellectually. We need them if we are to know anything, even ourselves. We may give our human loves the allegiance which we owe only to God, and that's what we've been talking about. When we don't acknowledge the need to give it all to God, and we just keep the human loves in their human capacity. We may give our human loves the allegiance which we owe only to God. Then they become God's. I had a professor in college who said at the time, your God is whatever the most important thing to you in your life. I thought, boy, that's succinct. And I think it's true. It's idolatry. Spend whatever's most important is what you worship the most. And those human loves, any one of them, as good as they are, they can become gods. And then Lewis goes on, then they become demons. Then they will destroy us. For natural loves that are allowed to become gods do not remain loves. They're still called so, but become, in fact, complicated forms of hatred. I don't know if any of you have read the book by Sheldon Van Auken called A Severe Mercy. Anybody know that book? Sheldon found his wife in college, and they got married, and they had a pact that they were going to focus their whole lives on their love for each other. And they were going to just build on that and just focus just on themselves and their love. When they were in grad school, they got to know C.S. Lewis and had many fine conversations with Lewis while he was a professor there. And eventually, they slowly came to the point of embracing the Christian faith. And Sheldon, after a while, became quite concerned because he realized that God was starting to take his place with his wife. As she was coming to faith and getting to know God, she was starting to honor God and love God more highly than she loved him. And it made him very angry and very jealous. And then to make matters worse, later on in life, she died, still quite young. And he had to work through this whole business of anger at this, what he called a pagan love, being superseded by his dear wife, whom he had chosen and pledged to honor above all people. And then she gets taken away. But as he grows in his own Christian faith, which was a slower growth process than for his wife, he finally got himself to the point where he could speak of God's severe mercy. There's a case where he didn't hold it in an open hand, he held it in a clutched fist. But God took it anyway. And so it took him a while to see where there was mercy, even in something as horrible as all of that. God redeems these things. He's called a redeemer for good reason. Lewis goes on to say in his book, The Four Loves, William Morris wrote a poem called Love, Love, and someone is said to have reviewed it briefly in the words, it isn't. Such has been the burden of this book, The Four Loves. The natural loves are not self-sufficient. Something else, at first vaguely described as decency and common sense, but later revealed as goodness, and finally as the whole Christian life must come to the help of the mere feeling, if the feeling is to be kept sweet. The rivalry between all natural loves and the love of God is something a Christian dare not forget. God is the great rival. I am a jealous God, he tells Israel back in the Old Testament. I read that and then it just hit me, dare not was interesting language to use in this instance. You and I had better not forget that all of our natural loves, there's going to be a rivalry between them and our Creator if we don't honor God first and foremost amidst all of those. Then in a less strict, more tender moment, Lewis writes in his letters to children, God knows quite well how hard we find it to love Him more than anyone or anything else, and He won't be angry with us as long as we're trying, and He will help us. I thought that was a kind ending to it, and Lewis, who did so well with children.
Sort of like that prayer you could have, Lord, I can't believe how I believe. Lord, I'm having trouble loving you. Help my unlovingness.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
We just ask Him to make up.
That's right. Admitting our weakness to God, who already knows it better than we do anyway. Yeah, Gene.
Well, I think going back several slides there, the phylactery ointment for the woman, go back a little more. This has been in my mind, I just wonder whether to say it. Keep going back. Next stop. There's the phylactery ointment right there. She says, Mother love is the highest and holiest what?
Feeling. Mm.
You see, when you said we use love way loosely, we certainly do. To her, love is a feeling.
Yeah.
And to a lot of us, love is a feeling. How can I love God when it's a feeling?
Mm-hmm.
You know, He has to do something for me. You know, how can I love someone who doesn't love me? Jesus says, love your enemy. Well, the only reason that it makes they're my enemies is because I don't love them. You know, so I have to feel about them. She got it wrong. Mother love is not a feeling in human nature. It's not the highest of what she thinks love is a feeling. But love is a gift from God. Love is a lot more solid than that, than a feeling. Because that kid's going to grow up and not like his mother. Will she still feel good about him? And I think when we talk about the love of God, we say God commands us to love Him, and we say, well, that means I have to feel good about Him. I have to feel warm feelings and fuzziness about Him while I can't even see Him. And now I'm supposed to be sinning because I don't have these warm, fuzzy ourselves inherently, that we're supposed to pump up the tank
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
and keep it going even though it's leaking, or pretend we love God, when actually all three of them are a gift from God. So when we say, God, help me to love you, it's not help me to feel good about you. It's like, give me that love. That's your gift. I don't have that because the kind of gift he's talking about is agape love.
Right.
It has nothing to do with how I feel about God.
And has no hint of selfishness in any way in it.
But Gene, don't you think, and Mary, me, as a parent, you have that same kind of love. You can't explain it to another person that hasn't been a parent. Your love for your children, it's something that's there, and no matter what they do, you still love them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but not every parent's like that, right?
I just think they are. I just think they are. I don't
You
know.
ever had a parent, you haven't had a parent who you had to please in order for them to love you, right? I think so.
No, I don't think my father loved me, but I do. But, you know, I've had my children that I just would say, I don't even want to be with this person near me anymore, but I still love them. You know, is that kind of how God's love is? I don't know. That we could give them just a little bit, like you said, until, you know.
Well, I think if love is a feeling, we were just listening to some,
I don't think my love for my children is a
yeah,
feeling.
okay, but then.
My love for my dog is a feeling.
Let's say, love between man and woman, we were just listening to some Elvis tunes at summer for the fun of it, And, I'm the highest mountain, swim the deepest ocean for you, but if you do anything to me, I'll hate you just as much.
Right.
And that'll be the next song about how you did me wrong.
Right.
And sometimes people stand at the altar and they make those promises and they're deeply in love. And that love turns to the deepest hate after a few years. Because love was a feeling.
Right.
And so that's what I'm getting at, is that it's more than a feeling. And that's a song too.
That's
Yeah.
a good song.
That's a
Yeah.
good song. Yeah.
Okay, I see by the clock that it's really about time for us to stop. And is there any other comments from anyone? Okay, thank you very much. We'll come close to finishing the book next week, I think.
You get clapped for a minute, don't you?